Hello, and welcome to Expose Yourself to Art. Today's guest is Indigo Moor. Poet Laureate Emeritus of Sacramento, Indigo Moor's fourth book of poetry, Everybody's Jonesing for Something, took second place in the University of Nebraska Press Backwater Prize. His second book, Through the Stonecutter's Window, won Northwestern University Press's Cave Canem Prize. His first and third books, Taproot and In the Room of Thirsts and Hungers, were both part of Main Street Rag's Editors Select Poetry Series. Indigo is an adjunct professor at Dominican University and visiting faculty for Dominican's MFA program, teaching poetry and short fiction. He is a former faculty member at the Stone Coast MFA program, where he graduated in 2012 with an MFA in poetry, fiction, and script writing. 3 of his short plays, Harvest, Shuffling, and the Red and Yellow Quartet, debuted at the 60 Million Plus Theater's Spring Playwrights Festival. His full-length stage play, Live at the Excelsior, was a finalist for the Images Theater Playwright Award, and the subsequent screenplay has been optioned for a full-length film. Indigo is the former poet editor for the Bookends Review Literary Journal and sits on the advisory boards for the Sacramento Poetry Center and the Modesto Stanislaus Poetry Center. He is a Cave Canem Fellow, former resident artist at 916 Inc., and a graduate member of the Artists' Residency Institute for Teaching Artists. A 10-year veteran of the U.S. Navy and a twice-decorated Gulf War veteran, Indigo divides his time between writing, teaching, and integrated circuit layout design for computer companies. Welcome, Indigo.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here, Linda. Thank you for having me.
Well, congratulations on the publication of your first book.
Thank you. It feels good to have it out, and you know, as well as I do, there's a certain relief that comes when you feel like it's kind of done. I'm finished with it. I can continue with my life, but then there's all the publicity that you have to do for it, and it's beautiful. It's painstakingly, wonderfully beautiful.
Now, you got the good news, 2 years ago that you won this prize?
It wasn't 2 years ago, but you've been with me that long. It feels like 2 years ago. It was 8 months, and you hear, with the larger presses, it's a big wheel. They're doing a lot of things, a lot of different books, and then you hear that you won, and then they say it'll be out in 8 to 9 months, and like, yay! I remember the first time I read it is because this was earlier last year, and I was looking at it and it said 2021, and I'm thinking that's got to be a typo, right? That's 2020. But it's beautiful because you get a chance to not think about the book, to write other things, and when you go back to it, it's like meeting an old friend again, becoming reacquainted.
What's it been like having a book come out during a pandemic?
This background that you're seeing right now is not normally the background you'd see in my readings. Normally it's the back of a hall or something, or a classroom. So you get used to the fact that you could be out working in a garden. As long as you prepared for the reading in advance, you could be doing anything you want. But I do miss meeting people. I think that's one of the beautiful things about having readings at different places and driving somewhere. You get to run into people and meet them. But this is wonderful because it's just, you feel at ease when you're reading. You feel perfectly comfortable. You don't have to worry about the drive back after you've gone out drinking with the people who have now bought your book.
Have you seen an increase in the number of participants in your workshops and people coming to your readings because they can Zoom in from anywhere?
Yes, and I've been fortunate. My readings have been well attended, and it's been great. I think people knowing that they don't have to go out, don't have to be around a bunch of people. They know they're going to get a good seat, and they just show up.
Well, let's go back and talk about your artistic background and influences on your artistic development, mentors, what have you.
Oh wow, there's been a lot of mentors. I tend to believe that that's not true. I was about to say to tend to believe I don't know enough. I tend to fear I don't know enough. So I'm always looking when someone wins something, I want to know, what they're doing. And you run into people who are doing things vastly different from you.
Yeah.
And if you work at it, you can incorporate some of what they do into your work. I believe that you can never know enough, even about your own work. You can never produce enough. There's different techniques and elements you can incorporate that will change your poems, or things you can use to get something across. Cyrus Cassels, who's not necessarily known for his ekphrastic work, his work that I copied, or his methods when I started learning ekphrastic work. Tim Siebel's writing in, oh God, when you write as someone else in a persona poems. Yusuf Komunyakaa from the beginning, because he is African American, grew up in the South, uh, is a man who I could tell struggled, or not necessarily struggled. Yeah, struggled with who he was and how he presented himself in the world. And
Mm.
a lot of African Americans do. I did. And learning that you can write exactly what you wanted, despite who you are, despite what people think you should write, all of Cave Canem. So there's been a lot of people who have changed my work for the better. Oh my God, I'm going to screw up her name. Rollins,
Oh,
Sonny Rollins, is that it? Sonny C. Rollins. Oh, please,
Allison C. Rollins?
Allison, thank you, because that would have been horrible if she saw this and thought, "What is this fool doing?" I've been looking at her work lately, and she's much younger than I am, and still I'm learning from how she does things. It's a process that never stops.
Yeah. When
Yeah.
did you start writing?
I've been kind of writing all my life, or expressing myself in some way. It wasn't as if as a kid, as I was writing things, I thought, I'm going to be a writer. I might have thought that, but it was for fiction and probably writing comic books or horror stories, because I fell in love with these collection of Alfred Hitchcock. And I'm sure he didn't put them together. They just had his name on them, of all these horror stories. And I love those. And I don't know if I ever tried to write one, but I remember thinking I wanted to grow up to write those things. Um, but normally I was just expressing myself. I painted as a kid. I did a lot of things to just express what I was feeling or what I was thinking. But it wasn't until near the end of 1999 that I actually thought I may be dedicating a large portion of my life to writing.
Hmm. When did you go into Cave Canem?
2001. And it wasn't like I'd heard of them. A friend of mine, Reggie Gibson, told me about it. We were both writers, both poets, and he was talking about this place that had just started. And at the time, it had only been in existence since '99, so it had pretty much just started. And I'm still firmly convinced the only reason I got in is because there weren't that many men applying at the time. There were a lot of women applying at the time. And from what I understand, it's still really tough for women to get in. But they try to balance it, and I got in. I would love to say they saw some promise in me, but I still think it was just because there weren't that many men applying. But I got so much out of that. I got to work with experienced writers, and more than anything, I got to see African American writers writing whatever the hell they wanted.
Mm.
There was a guy there writing in German. There was a guy there who was writing strictly opera pieces. And I got to see that I wasn't constrained by anything, by what people thought I should be writing. And that really opened me up.
You teach a lot of workshops and you're a professor. Are you ever asked about writer's block?
So, I'm never asked about it. I was working with the Sacramento Poetry Center, and I was the vice president at the time when Al Young came to. He was a good friend. He's a very good friend, and he came and did the conference for almost nothing. I was so thankful to him, and we were taking a walk before the festivities started, and we got on the subject of writer's block. And I had never thought of it before because I've never had a problem with finding things to write. And he said, I think people with writer's block are really saying that they run out of things to say about themselves. And I don't necessarily think that that's true to an extent, but I do believe that as you're taking in things, I've taken a lot of input, probably too much from television and other people's books and just everything I could possibly get my hands on. That when you start thinking outside yourself, it becomes easier to write about something else, even if it's invented. I recognize that for me, if I'm having trouble writing, it's because there's a lot of other things going on in my life. And I believe it's so easy to think about those things as blocking you from writing, blocking you from painting, blocking you from doing something else and thinking, oh, I'm having writer's block. You're not. What you need to do is learn. And sometimes it comes through meditation. Sometimes it turns from getting the hell out of the house, getting a chance to just give yourself to think of something else, to just live somewhere else. If you're an artist, you have a world inside your head where you get to escape into. The question becomes, are you giving yourself a chance to just be there, or is there so much that's holding you back that you can't get away from it? I believe that calling it writer's block can be as limiting as anything else. You're getting blocked from writing, but there's usually a way to get out of it.
Oh, thank you. Let's take a look at your new book. I think the cover is just gorgeous.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry. I'm trying. There we go. Yes. All right. All right. Yes, that's it. That is a photograph by Michael Lewellen, who is you know how you say local artist, but you really mean world expanding artist. He just happens to live locally, or she just happens to live locally. That's Michael Lewellen, and this is from a photo shoot he did called Image Nation, and it's based on a workshop that he was teaching. I think he still teaches it sometimes, and he was teaching veterans how to deal with PTSD by working through photography. And he also did these pictures of different veterans. This is actually from a picture of a Vietnam veteran who was, I know it's difficult to say, forced to kill someone, but he was basically ambushed by a Vietnam warrior, and he killed him. He is like all of us. He has things that we've done in our lives that we cannot take back. And all he could do was bring this bowl back with him. And this bowl was from the warrior, from the person living in Vietnam, who only got one bowl of rice to eat per day. I don't know if when something like this happens to us, we can ever fully recover from it. But I imagine he would be jonesing for some relief from it, from this bowl, from this image of himself. And it was the perfect picture for the cover of the book.
Would you please explain the title?
Everybody's jonesing for something. Jonesing it's an old word. There's so many possible derivations, but the one I heard all the time as a kid, if someone was jonesing, they were on drugs. They were going through withdrawal, and even if you've never experienced it through your own life, you know from enough television that someone who's jonesing for something will do anything to relieve that hurt, that pain, or that joy they feel they're going to relieve by getting it. You'll hear people saying now things like, I'm jonesing for a hamburger, but the deepness of this word, the visceral nature of it. It's something that's difficult to explain, but we all have it. We all Jones for something. We've seen it over the last 4 years. People are jonesing for the type of country that they want, that they would do anything to get it back.
Mm.
Jonesing for missing someone that's died. Jonesing for missing someone who's gone. Jonesing for hoping someone would leave because you think it's going to better your life. But we all have something we're jonesing for, even if we don't think that we're jonesing for, because we believe it's what we desire, when often what we feel we desire is not what we need. So the book looks at different people, people that I identify with, people I absolutely do not identify with. It uses poetry, short fiction, memoir pieces, stage plays, because there's no way, at least for me, that I can encapsulate so many people in so many different walks of life by looking at it from one particular poetic form, like I did in my third book. The book is expansive because this understanding of America is expansive.
Hmm. Would you please read us a selection from the book?
Absolutely. I picked several poems because I thought I wanted to see the direction of the interview before I decided which one I'm going to read. So I'm going to read Genealogy. And it's based on looking back and finding out more about my name and more about how it came to be, not only for me, but how it came to be for America. Because for a time, we actually grew the indigo plant here. Genealogy. The picture on my computer is of an ink-grained bird roosting a dead branch above the tableau. A slave's foot seeps into blue sludge so rancid, even buzzards stay clear. A 6-year death watch starts its chime. Look up crow, and you find raven, rook, jackdaw, vigil seekers. Everything dies here, even dreams. Indigo dye is wild theatrics, vein deep in skin and ground. Let's call it a bone plague. Did blood diamonds ever plow through ancestry like this scythe through a dozen photo albums? A queen's beauty has its price. Slaves perished over her cobalt silk. Racked coughs on hues that split skin and tumid flesh. So I have an ancestor whose feet and hands pounded pulp for hours before shrinking and rotting off, nesting like a bruised tomato in the crook of my family tree. Lucia was ripe, 16 years old, dragging indigo plants to South Carolina, tossing death in the highlands like a carcass across the floor of my children's lives. It's all so noble in print. Where's the whip slicing the backs red? A cry like an ugly cough I own and pass down to them.
Wow, that is so stunning.
Oh, thank you.
Is there another selection from this book that you also might share with us?
Absolutely.
Oh, good, good.
Unjumping the broom. Our bedroom is a circus. Moths hang from trapezes. Doubts are the lions jumping through hoops and garters, setting curtains of flames. You say the broken fork in the sink was an omen. Clown paper scales the walls of your sleep. The face paint coating my dreams can't mask our problems. No matter, nothing's random. I'm dragging a foot through cotton candy, trolling for good news, something to get me out of bed. You slip on a nightgown dotted with crickets. They chirp for the moon's spotlight, traipsing through our open window on camel stilt beams. Our anemic slice of wedding cake is missing from the freezer, tossed center-ring for the elephants to trample. I blame the hyena or the media, anyone except that silhouetted, pissed-off you holding the plastic gun with the paper bang flag aimed at my temple. I've gone deaf from its repeated silence. I know. Tomorrow night, let's drag the cannon bedside. One of us climbs in. The other dons the clown's car like a cheap suit and starts running. Let's see who gets the hell out of this marriage faster.
That's devastating. Oh my gosh.
Well, thank you.
There are, 3 short plays in this book?
There are, yes.
And you were saying earlier you were even envisioning how you might be able to bring them into a poetry reading.
There are 2 of the plays have been staged, 2 of these plays. And I know both of the actresses that portrayed it. So if I could convince them for a reading, I would definitely bring them on and let them do it because they did great jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the beautiful things about writing for stage or screen is that it's like a blueprint. It's not like a poem where everything is spelled out, and you get to see the actors doing the work that really brings it to life because they have figured out the background of the characters that you didn't write. They know what the characters are thinking, which isn't in the scripts, and they really bring it to life. So hopefully I can convince them one time to join me for a reading.
How did you start writing plays?
Well, all right. So I was at AWP, and this is a story that starts off sounding like it has nothing to do with it, but I promise you it does. I was at AWP at one of the after parties. I want to say it was when I was in Chicago, and I was talking to this fiction writer, and this was before I'd even gone to a Master of Fine Arts program. And I was talking to a fiction writer who said that she could tell when poets were trying to write fiction and when fiction writers were trying to write poetry. And I asked her about a few people that do that. I said, so you can tell when Margaret Atwood is writing poetry that she's really a fiction writer, or vice versa. And she said that she didn't even realize that she wrote it. So that made me think. Well, what is the delineation? How can you tell if you're writing one or the other what the differences are? And I was shopping around for a Master of Fine Arts program. And when I got there, I knew what I wanted to work on. It was one of the reasons I chose the Stone Coast MFA program. It was because I wanted to learn what those differences were. I wanted to learn the way that the mind had to rethink itself or reform itself to write fiction, to write poetry. And by the time I got there and met some of the playwrights, I wanted to learn playwriting too, and I wanted to learn script writing. And my thesis was Taming the Hydra, writing across multiple genres. And I worked on a play there that I really loved, and it came from an image that I had as a kid that was very real to me, and Sheryl Crow's We Do What We Can. And the two of those came together to form this play. And once, the Mike Kimball, who was my first playwright teacher, bless his heart. When I look back now, I don't know why he didn't strangle me, because I was resisting so much, because I was a poetry writer and I wanted to do these things to spell everything out. And he would just very simply say, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that. You cannot do that. And I finally listened and got it. It was a collaborative art, and you had to be happy with the notion that people were going to bring their own talents into it, people as talented as you. The actors, the directors, the stage writers, they're no less talented than a writer, and they get a say in how beautiful it's going to be. And once you buy into that, you're hooked.
Hmm. Have you ever seen something of yours performed and just been blown away by how different their interpretation was? It was something you hadn't even imagined?
All right, so let's look at the term blown away. I have been I've been blown away thinking, oh my God. And been blown away thinking, oh my God. Yes, I have been.
Okay. The risks you run.
The risk. And you know what? The risk is worth it. Because
Mm,
sometimes they change it. They don't change it. That's not true. They can change it, but they don't necessarily have to change it for it to be something you never thought of before.
mm.
And when they do that, it gives you goosebumps.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at the book that preceded Everybody's Jonesing for Something, In the Room of Thirsts and Hungers.
Yes.
It's another gorgeous book. I just love this. You did a lot of research for this book, didn't you?
I did, yes. And depending on what day you ask me, it teaches me, wow, if you really want to, you can do anything. Or it teaches me, God, I never want to do that again. Because there was just so much studying. I had once collected the number of books that I read because basically I had to read about the life of Paul Robeson, and I had to read about not only the life of Othello because he was fictional, but the time frame that he existed in, and the time frame that Shakespeare existed in, and the time frame as far as looking at the characters around each of those people to get an idea of what their lives were like. And I ended up writing about characters in their time frame because I was looking at Paul Robeson and Othello as if they were both real. Of course, Robeson was. And I was setting them writing to each other because they were cousins. And Robeson was the older, Othello was the older person. Robeson was in his time frame. He was from coming back from Russia for the first time, and he had this idea of how he was going to change America. Now, Othello at this point was already at the point where he was realizing that Iago was perhaps not, well, he wasn't realizing, but we were seeing that Iago was working against Othello in all ways. And Othello was seeing his life basically fall apart. So he was in a position to try to change Robeson's mind on things that Robeson was doing. But Robeson was never going to change his mind. He was not that person. He would be fixed on a furious star. And there's a wonderful book by that name that I can't remember the woman who wrote it, but I was so upset when I saw it because that would have been the name of this book. And I had not seen that. It's just a perfect title. But you get to see these men whose lives were mirrored tragedies. They both went down the same path. They both were in on either for Othello the destruction, or with Robeson a demise that considering the country that he was living in and considering who he was, it was difficult to imagine that it would have turned out any way than it did. So I love the book. I think it says a lot about me because The Room of Thirst and Hungers is just my head. It's where I see the things that African Americans go through, the things that Robeson went through as a Negro, the things that Othello went through as a Moor, and very little changes ever. I see the misogyny, I see the racism, and it spurned all the pieces in this book.
Would you please read a selection from this book?
Absolutely. And I want to spend a short second just speaking, or it won't be a second, a minute or so speaking about the difficulty of writing to history and culture. You do so much research that you have to be careful that the book doesn't turn into a book about history. It's not supposed to be. This is poetry. And what you end up having to do is find a moment, an emotional moment that you connect with, and write about that. And then the history comes into it because you've done so much work to make it real. This poem is called A Bullfight, a Revolution, and a Langston. Both Langston Hughes and Ernest Hemingway were correspondents to American papers for the Spanish Civil War. It is known that they were good friends, but since they separately wrote about bullfights, it's assumed that they went to bullfights together. So this is a poem about them at a bullfight. Fondling a gin flask. Hemingway quips, "We should live in the ring, not die on our butts in the stands." The matador executes Veronica, wiping the brow of a 2-ton Christ. Today, there are no nationalists, no loyalists, only Spaniards. Ernest believes the Negro will have his day, that all locked doors shatter their frames when kicked open. Three barbed flags dive like swimmers into the bull. All poetry should be that direct, merciless to marrow. Tertia de muerte, the beast sways, a cattail and a zephyr. I wonder if he can taste his ancestors' screams in the air. We could hollow his horns and trumpet 2 civil wars, America to Spain, his sacrifice uniting our struggles. There's a devil in the matador's patience. Sword and muleta, the cape red not for the bull, but to hide the blood. Every revolution needs a martyr. Mules pull the carcass round the ring like Hector's at Troy. Ernest says muleta and mulatta were meant to sound alike, that both carry a man's hard choices locked in skin.
Excellent. Thank you
Thank
so much. These are all broken sonnets. At what
Yes.
point did you decide to do that?
I want to say way too late because I'd written them in the Shakespearean sonnet, but I realized that this book is about broken people. It's about broken dreams. It's about trying to work your way through a broken country.
Mm.
And when I wrote them as Shakespearean sonnets, it didn't speak that way. It spoke as if I was trying to make the book less rebellious than it was, as if the people themselves were less rebellious than they were. And I realized that by keeping it into a sonnet form that was written for an entirely different train of mind, I was forcing the book and the people to be something that I didn't want it to be. So I invented a broken sonnet. I took away the rhyming at the ends, which sounds like it's cheating, but these people were not being held by the constraints of something that I didn't want them to be held by. So they had 4 quatrains, 4 stanzas of 4 lines, where they were speaking of trying to figure out or fix something in their lives. And then at the end, in the couplet at the end, it all comes unraveled. There is no solution to most of what happened in these people's lives or in our own lives. And I think it's important sometimes to celebrate that it's the struggle and the realization of what you're going through and the attempt to try to stop it, which is just as important as if you ever succeed.
How about your second book, Through the Stonecutter's Window? Let's take a look at that.
Yes. All right, so Through the Stonecutter's Window, my first book, Taproot, had been published. I was happy that it got published. Through the Stonecutter's Window was, how do I put it? We all write poems that are outside of an arc of something. Like at this point, I generally write poems that are meant for a collection. They're written for a book. I'm moving towards something. This Through the Stonecutter's Window was not that way. I was just writing anything that came to mind. I'd worked so long on Taproot, the book before, and many of these poems are either written through poems that I was writing for Taproot or written after Taproot. And I had been experimenting with a lot of things, including ekphrastic work. And when I finished like 70 poems or so, and I'm looking at them, and I realized there was an arc. And it's the only book I've ever written where the arc was either subconscious or it just appeared afterwards. And it was everything that I was looking at. It was a time in my life where I was trying to figure out, it seems like I'm always trying to figure out who I am. But at this time, there were certain things that were really important to me. Artwork was, music was, and this book became the viewpoint of one person's life on their life, on how they perceive life, on how they saw how they went through life, how they were moving through life, and still realizing that they weren't moving towards something that they saw as finite. And Through the Stonecutter's Window is because there is a stonecutter looking through a window, and there's a black hole that comes down through the window and is looking out at the world as if the black hole is the stonecutter. That's where the title comes from. It comes from a poem in the book where a black hole is looking out the window of the stonecutter's window.
Would you please read one of these poems?
Yes, and obviously sometimes they have too much time to think. Yes, I said that I was writing a lot of ekphrastic work. Ekphrasis is a Greek word, and it basically means into. But the Greeks used it to say one art form was being transported into another art form. And this is me writing a poem about an acrylic work by an artist named Katie Kalk, who did a picture of Monet. Anchored, as his tired bones insisted, to this chair, sunken into a cashmere coat with thick raised collar, you had no choice but to swirl his weight onto the wicker armrest. You give us Monet, subtracted by everything he no longer is. Cataract stacking behind shades, shrunken skull plastered beneath the brim of a gaudy sun hat. No wonder he succumbed to this pose. Camille, Alice, and Jean are all dead, fading as his days and his eyesight. Gently, he rocks the cottage before him, the bridge after, off the face focus of the canvas. I can almost see you empirically calling brilliant strokes and heroic lights to take arms against the dying of Claude's seasons, yet not even your signature, resembling a Roman numeral 9, can resurrect feline litheness back into his body. Of the futility he must sense in you, the bemused tilt of his head says all we need to know. Beneath the light-soaked beard, our lips pressed to keep the secret you are desperate to protect us from. A day will come for each of us when we are nothing more than still life in someone else's eyes.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
So on to Taproot, the very first.
Yes. Taproot is, I think there's such things as a gateway book. That book that you've had to write, that you need to write before you can really write anything else. And Taproot is mine.
Apt title then.
Well, thank you.
What's the arc of this book?
Where I'm looking. What's that?
What is the arc of this book?
At the time, I had been estranged from the South for a number of years, and it wasn't. I think it's like a lot of Southerners. You leave, with no clear understanding of where you've been. And you're left with so many strings on like a tapestry that you're pulling at. And you know that if you pull too much on anyone, the whole thing will unravel, but you need to figure it out. And my brother had recently died, and he and I had never been close. And Taproot was my means of trying to understand how we could have lived in the same house and still not have any real kinship with each other and other issues that I'd had. So it was me trying to figure out the South.
Please read one of these poems, if you would.
Yes. I will read the last two pieces, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
All right. Pull. I am told it was moonlight that ripened your failing heart until it finally cracked, sent the clock hand spinning off your flesh. I was a coward, still 3,000 miles away, convincing myself that I came at all. I could never catch the dying hour. Forgive me, brother. For decades, your name has stretched my tongue to breaking, but love and pain often anguish logic. Long ago, on a night like this, I watched Uncle rocket a coyote skyward with a fistful of buckshot. It slammed to the ground, twisted, skidding across the grass. Somehow, it didn't know it was supposed to be dead. Front legs pawed the air as if leveled by nothing more than errant moonlight. Chicken feathers lined its muzzle. It mewed, eyes tunneling through me to the underbrush where its mate stood, now crosshair down Uncle's barrel. Excuse me. The mate stood mesmerized, not knowing that in this world, every fool carries a twin heart. Bang! I shouted, and the underbrush went wild with the mates running. Still, if animals have souls, two died that night. Uncle cursed me under the killing sky. Why, boy? You know she'll hit the coop later. Why did you do that? This is my understanding of the fear and silence of these wounded nights. The moon snares in the sweet spot of the throat, and everything and everyone that lives on is trapped in love. Apotheosis. There is an extra star in Orion's belt. I arc my mason jar up through the fading light and snatch the firefly in mid-pulse. The heat lightning is a distant sweetness. Sugar pink throbs on nimbus clouds draining from the night's basin. A screech owl's cry hugs the pine-peaked horizon. Behind me is an aluminum whoosh, a swing, a miss, a curse. In firefly baseball, the elusive lime green flickerings mock us all. Blind in the graying, we are forever doomed to swing where they were. We swear and corkscrew to the ground. The tall, uncut grass plays slivered kite to the evening breeze. Silhouetted, Mama laughs at every exaggerated lunge, twist, and fall. Her fingers are Promethean tongs that trap each cigarette's volcanic ember. But tonight, there is more flame than heart and hand can hold. With a 12 firefly lantern pressed to my cheek, does my face glow, Mama? Do I shine? Tomorrow noon, the rested beak of the weather vane will swing north. Mama, summer, the fireflies, all gone.
That poem always makes me cry.
Mm.
That is so moving. Thank you
Thank
so much. Ooh. Well, Indigo, what are you working on currently?
Well, surprisingly or unsurprisingly to people who write out there, I'm doing a lot more publicity than writing.
Mm.
But I'm slowly getting back to working on my memoir, which is what I was doing between the time I found out the book had been accepted to the time it was published. And it's going well. I love writing short, flash memoir pieces. I'm sure there's a term for that, or if there's not, somebody will be willing to come up with it because they always do. I'm enjoying it. What's that awful term for creative nonfiction now? There's a creative memoir. There's a term for it that just drives me nuts. It sounds like something Andy Warhol would have come up with. And not that I mind his painting, but the term itself is, I can't even think of it now. Like pop memoir or something. I don't
Oh
remember.
no.
It's something awful, but yeah, I'm writing those. It's always difficult looking back
Mm.
at things that you are working on and uncovering. My time in the Navy, I have a good friend who remembers so much more than I do, even from the time we were in boot camp, which was 86, I think it was, and he remembers little things that I don't know how he remembers, but then it spawns so many memories, and you think of another story. But always there's the arc. Everything you're writing doesn't have to be about the arc, but by the time it gets into the book, the only thing that goes, the things that go in there are things that express or lead to what you're trying to get across with the book. And for me, it's getting to how did I become this person that did something or almost did something in Desert Storm that I would never imagine I would have done. And the only way to get at that is to look at the things of your life that led you to get to this point to being that person.
Well, I look forward to it whenever it comes out. I'll be one of the
So,
first to grab it and read it.
and then I'll be talking about the next thing I'm doing.
Yeah, that'll be great. In sometime in the past year, you wrote "Letter to Sacramento: A Riotous Anodyne." Please talk about that.
I was in Philadelphia at the time, working a government contractor, working on computer chips for them, and I got a message from John Freeman. Thank God I remembered his name. Of Literary Hub, which is of course it's huge. It's a wonderful product. You can find it just by looking up Literary Hub. And he wanted me to write a letter to Sacramento. At the time, he had no idea I was in Philadelphia. And this was during the protests, it was during the riots, and he wanted me to talk about that. And at the time, the protests and riots were going on in Philadelphia, and they were close to me. They were very close to me. The streets had shut down in many parts. You drive to a certain place and find a large military vehicle there and men with assault rifles, and you went another direction. And when I was writing the first part of it, the riots had started or the protests had started. I have no problems with them being called riots because I believe that that's what needed to happen. I believe that when people like myself, like anyone who's in a position where what they need has been ignored for so long after so many protests. I mean, if you're in a marriage with someone and that person hasn't been listened to or you haven't been listened to, it can end in violence. And there's a reason for that. And I was seeing the smoke, the helicopters are coming around my room, and I'm writing a letter to Sacramento as if Sacramento was a person, explaining and understanding that this was happening in what was basically my home city as well. So it led me to think about why I felt the protests were happening and things that happened to me. So I wrote about a time when I was a child and in a room and in a classroom, we were discussing the red wheelbarrow. And I had an interpretation of the red wheelbarrow that no one can deny, because there's nothing in a poem that doesn't say that that wasn't true, that it couldn't be interpreted my way. But there was no room for my interpretation, because my interpretation was written from a poor African American's viewpoint. And I felt so frustrated because of who I was, my interpretation wasn't true. It had nothing to do with the fact that the interpretation was invalidated by anything except the people around me. And to me, explaining this to Sacramento about why there would be burnings, why there could be death, that was the arc of the letter. That's what the letter was about.
Do you have it on hand?
I do. You'll have to give me a second. You can ask me another question, because as I was trying to find the picture to send you of my second book, I now realize, I was thinking, why do I have this window open? I'm about to go on. That was why I had that window open. So if you can ask me another question while that's going on, because the people, they'll never know what we're doing. Yeah, the people don't listen to this.
I guess I can jump ahead, because the only other thing I have are the lightning 10 questions. How good are you at multitasking?
Well, why would you want to do that? You asked me about a letter to Sacramento. Why don't we just go to that?
Do you have it on hand?
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. Now, it's really long. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Let's see. What do we have left?
252. This may be something that I read an excerpt from,
Okay.
and we can give them. Technically, if you put in a letter to Sacramento and Indigo, you'll find it. But sure. I'll just read the first part of it. Dear Sacramento, yes, I have heard about the protests, trouble scarring your body. I can only imagine your fear. You are entering your summer phase, casting your calm heat across the fields, the tranquil streams and rivers, open sky from horizon to horizon. My God, you are beautiful. And now all of that has changed, hasn't it? One man's killing in another city has brought you to this reckoning. His pain flutters city to city like a wounded bird, raising arms city to suburb. No, it is not your fault. You're the third most diverse city in the country, and you should be proud of that, but let us be open and honest. After 23 years together, we owe that to each other. You have had your problems. Your skeletons refuse to stay hidden. With such a luscious landscape and rainbow kaleidoscope, the school pictures, the children, it is easy to forget that some parts of your rainbow shine brighter. Some of the bends are thinner, more ethereal than they should be. No, I am not writing to kick you as you face another night of fire and anger. I love you, even as you kneel on the edge of this precipice, wondering which way rolls you into oblivion. I can't promise you the morning will not bring you more pain, craters in your beautiful skin. There are many folks ready for some things to burn, and they will not be stopped by public condemnation, the cries for peaceful protests. I know none of this is your fault, but protesters like me and people of color have the same fault, have the same problem. How others treat them is not their fault.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were on Insight with Beth Ruyak, and
Yes.
to your surprise, she brought in another guest. Could you tell us just a little about that?
All right. So after this came out, the very next day, It came out on Literary Hub. Please visit Literary Hub. They promote things every week, put great writings up. And I got a call from NPR the very next day, and they wanted me to be on that day. They said they had an opening. I don't know if they bumped somebody. I don't know. I sitting in a parking lot outside of where I worked, and because it was the only place to get a signal, you couldn't get a signal in the building. And I'm on this interview, and I see a storm is rolling in. And this sounds like something that's in a bad movie, but seriously, a storm's rolling in. The trees are blowing, and she says, "Oh, we have a person who's joining us today who apparently wasn't supposed to join, and it was the chief of police for Sacramento." And by this time, hand to God, the wind's blowing so hard that it's shaking the cars next to me, and I can just picture them tumbling over and into my car. But I'm not getting off this interview because I don't know what he's going to say. And if he says something I feel is antithetical to what we were talking about, I wanted to be there to say it. We didn't necessarily disagree on anything. That's not true. We did disagree on something. We just didn't argue about it. He had one stance where he was basically saying, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he believed that there was no reason for there to be any damage or for there to be any violence. And I spoke of this just a little while ago in this interview, when people are ignored for so long, violence is something you're going to expect. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if you disagree with what they're saying. What it comes down to is if you're in a relationship with someone, and we are all in a relationship with each other, you can't just ignore what they're saying or tell them that it's beneath what you think should be happening. And that's what's going to spawn protests, and it's going to spawn riots. And I spoke that very calmly. And if you listen to the interview, it just sounds like we're two old friends just having a talk. We're not. And I think it turned out to be a good interview.
It was a very good interview. All right, we're almost out of time, and I've just loved talking with you and hearing your work. We're just going to close out with these little questions.
All right.
You ready?
I don't know. I'll tell you after the questions. We can edit some of these out, right? It'll
I guess you can reserve the right to.
We'll fix it in post, yes. All right.
All right. Indigo, what sound do you like best?
What sound?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm going to give a little bit of a long answer. I like the sound of the upright bass. And oh my God, the Sin Eeg is a wonderful singer. Thomas Fonsebeck. I love it when Thomas Fonsebeck is playing because his bass sounds like it's been, like you see a picture and you know it's been photoshopped. His bass sounds like the sound has been photoshopped, and it's not, because I've heard him play live and he's just, it's so clean, so beautiful.
Great. What's your favorite animal and why?
Panther, but not for the reason you're thinking of. It's not because of Black Panther. It's because I saw this documentary on panthers, and the narrator was saying when he gets tired, he lays down wherever he is and just takes a nap because he has no fear of anything bothering him. God, it would be so great to live like that.
Any cat. If you could snap your fingers and be anywhere in time and space, where would you go?
Well, if it's time, it would be now, because I don't know if you've noticed, but for minorities and for women, as you go back farther in time, things tend to get worse for you. So I'd love to be in Lisbon right now. Yeah.
Nice. What do you dream about often? Do you have any repeating dreams or frequent?
I have the most ridiculously vivid dreams. It's the type of thing that I thought that everyone dreamt that way until I got older and started talking about my dreams, and my dreams are just They could be books. Yeah. I don't dream about anything in particular. Most dreams, if it's a particular thing, like I used to dream that if I went to up into a tall building, the buildings was gonna fall. Wasn't that frightening? The falling was frightening, but nothing can kill me in a dream. So I knew I wasn't gonna die, but I don't dream that anymore. If I'm up there, I just stop thinking about the building falling, and
Hmm,
yeah. Took me years to learn to fly, but I can do that too. So
good. This will be the last. What gives you hope?
any particular thing, or I'll tell you, I was avoiding saying something. What gave me hope recently in our judicial system in America was seeing people who didn't look like me out in the protests.
Hmm,
Because I've always believed, if you're looking at a minority, it's not our country. We live here. We'd love for it to make a difference. But if this country was going to change, it had to be because basically white people decided that this was not the country that they wanted and they were ready to fight for it. I did not believe that was going to happen. And boy, do I owe y'all an apology.
we owe
And it
you a
gives me
huge
hope.
apology.
Yeah.
Oh, this has been so wonderful. Thank you very much, Indigo. It's just been a
Thank
huge
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Next week on Expose Yourself to Art, our guest will be the painter Jordy Camps.
All right.
Thanks again.
Thank you.